Paul Manafort is Donald Trump's campaign manager. People have talked about his ties to Russia before, primarily through his ties to the former leader of Ukraine, Viktor Yanukovych, who, of course, was tied to Russia and then eventually fled to Russia during a revolution there in Ukraine. And so now the New York Times has a story that connects him even more thoroughly to the former Russian-linked Ukrainian government. Sit down, buckle up, because here comes some pretty devastating information. They explain that Manafort had an office off of Independence Square in Kiev, the capital of Ukraine, until very, very recently. Now, you're going to see at the end that Manafort denies all this, which is preposterous, given what we already know and that's confirmed, including his office. Now, New York Times explains, Mr. Manafort's presence remains elsewhere here in the capital, where government investigators examining secret records have found his name as well as companies he saw business with, as they try to untangle a corrupt network that they say was used to loot Ukrainian assets and influence elections during the administration of Mr. Manafort's main client, former President Viktor F. Yanukovych. Now, understand, this is not the New York Times saying they've got this evidence. It's the Ukrainian government who is going through this anti-corruption investigation of the former government, and they find documents, records, etc. That is what the New York Times is reporting on. Because as we speak, Manafort, Trump, and everybody else connected to, New York Times hates me, the media hates me, boo. Well, they're reporting what is found by the Ukrainian government. What do you want them to do? Not report it? They certainly didn't make it up. They're doing their job as reporters. Okay. So now what does it show that Manafort does not want you to know and Trump doesn't want you to know? Handwritten ledgers show $12.7 million in undisclosed cash payments designated for Mr. Manafort from Mr. Yanukovych's pro-Russian political party from 2007 to 2012. He's in those ledgers a total of 22 times. Now, Manafort says, and this part is true, he says, well, I mean, maybe I'm in those ledgers, but you don't have other evidence that I took the money and put it in my pocket or put it into my bank account. For the moment being, they do not have that. So he's in the ledger. It says, okay, here's Manafort's money, undisclosed cash, give it to him, and it totals $12.7 million. He's like, but you don't have video of me actually taking the money and putting it in my pocket. Okay, congratulations on that, but this is pretty strong evidence. Now, according to Ukraine's newly formed National Anti-Corruption Bureau, the one I was alluding to, investigators assert that the disbursements were part of an illegal off-the-books system whose recipients also included election officials. Now, I'm going to tell you why they might have been doing this in the first place in a little bit. First, these are the ledgers that they found. Now, this is a random page out of the ledger. This page does not have Manafort's name on it, but they do have those pages. Just gives you a sense of how they kept the books and the evidence that they do have, because they have all of the ledgers. And as I said, Manafort's mentioned 22 times to the tune of $12.7 million. Okay. Now, what's Manafort and other companies related to Yanukovych doing, and why are they receiving this money? Well, New York Times explains, among the hundreds of murky transactions these companies engaged in was an $18 million deal to sell Ukrainian cable television assets to a partnership put together by Mr. Manafort and a Russian oligarch, Oleg Deripaska, a close ally of President Vladimir Putin. Say it with me. Of course! So Yanukovych is backed up by Putin, and what these oligarchs go and do is then they go buy the assets of the government. So now that is among the different transactions they do, but that's one way that Yanukovych pays off Putin and his allies in Russia. Now, one thing that really helps is having an American face on it. Like, oh no, this is a credible business deal. Here's Paul Manafort, who's worked on national presidential campaigns in America, so it must be legitimate. Right, Paul? Yes, okay. Right, Paul needs a new bucket of cash. Hold on, write down Manafort again in the ledger, undisclosed cash, here you go. Okay. Now, to give you a sense of how this international consulting racket works, let's go back a little bit, because Manafort's been doing this a long, long time. He's not the only one. A lot of these guys who worked in U.S. politics then go cash in from very questionable sources abroad. Again, the whole point is there's an American that's respected involved, so obviously we can't be doing anything wrong. Right. So The developments in Ukraine underscored the risky nature of the international consulting that has been a staple of Mr. Manafort's business since the 1980s, when he went to work for the Philippine dictator, Ferdinand Marcos. Before joining Mr. Trump's campaign this spring, Mr. Manafort's most prominent recent client was Mr. Yanukovych, who, like Mr. Marcos, was deposed in a popular uprising. Now, the Manaforts of the world will say, Ferdinand Marcos, I did nothing untoward about that at all. I mean, look, he was a run-of-the-mill dictator, and I was helping him with pleasant business transactions. Or perhaps you were helping the dictator whitewash a lot of what he did by putting an American face on it. Okay, now in this case, what are the details of what he did to make sure that he got this money? Well, they explain here, before he fled Russia 2 years ago, Mr. Yanukovych and his party of regions relied heavily on the advice of Mr. Manafort and his firm, who helped them win several elections. During that period, Mr. Manafort never registered as a foreign agent with the United States Justice Department, as required of those seeking to influence American policy on behalf of foreign clients, although one of his subcontractors did. So you've got two things in there. So we need you to help us with the cable deal, and then help us figure out how we win these elections. Again, the legitimacy of those elections and whether they were fair is a different matter. I'm not speaking to it here. Maybe he helped them win those elections in a perfectly fair way, okay? So, but if you do that, you're supposed to register as a foreign agent. He don't want to do that so that he can come back and work for a dictator. I mean a presidential candidate that is legitimate like Donald Trump, right? So it's like, what's the difference? Ferdinand Marcos, Yanukovych, Trump, it's all the same thing. That's all I do for a living. All right, so he also worked to burnish his client's image in the West and helped Mr. Yanukovych's administration draft a report defending its prosecution of his chief rival, Yulia V. Tymoshenko, in 2012. So this is point number 3. We're setting up businesses. I'm helping you win elections. And then when you need to imprison your political opponent, don't worry, I'll do the PR for you. Keep that in mind, because he's now providing his services to Donald J. Trump. Okay. While working in Ukraine, Mr. Manafort had also positioned himself to profit from business deals that benefit from connections he had gained through his political consulting. One of them, according to court filings, involved a network of offshore companies that government investigators and independent journalists in Ukraine have said was used to launder public money, assets purportedly stolen by cronies of the government. That is the fourth thing he's doing for the Ukrainian government, which is not pleasant. Okay, now a little bit more detail here. In a recent interview, Gorbatyuk, Ukraine's special prosecutor for high-level corruption cases, pointed to an open file on his desk containing paperwork for one of the shell companies, Milltown Corporate Services Limited, which played a central role in the state's purchase of 2 oil derricks for $785 million, or about double what they were said to be worth. So Milltown is one of Manafort's companies. This goes back to yet another business deal where, oh, golly gee, did I pay double what it's worth from the Ukrainian government's money, which is the taxpayers of Ukraine, and it goes to allies of Yanukovych and Putin, and they make a lot more money? It's okay. We got an American who's legitimate here. Manafort, he's worked in presidential elections for Americans, and we did it through his company, so it must be legitimate. You see how this game is played? Manafort's knee-deep in this, as you can see from these papers. This guy's running the presidential campaign of one of the major parties' candidates right now here in America. Third world, it isn't just for the third world anymore. It's right here in the United States. So finally, a couple more notes here. Mr. Manafort continued working in Ukraine after the demise of Mr. Yanukovych's government, helping allies of the ousted president and others form a political bloc that opposed the new pro-Western administration. Oh, wonderful! Even after Yanukovych was deposed, he was still Manafort was trying to oppose pro-Western governments. And by the way, what did Manafort do while running Trump's campaign? Well, at the RNC, the one thing he got involved was to make sure that we were not tough on the Russians in their incursion into Ukraine. So as they took over Crimea, and they're in eastern Ukraine as we speak, Manafort comes in and puts into the platform of the Republican Party, we will not go after the Russians for that. They are not at fault. No, we're not going to give military help to Ukraine. No way. That's the pro-Western government he's opposed to. I've never seen anything like this. I mean, this guy should have literally been a foreign agent. He should have filed as such. Here he is, couldn't be closer tied to Putin, now running one of the major campaigns. Now, when you ask Manafort today, he says, I have never received a single off-the-books cash payment as falsely reported by the New York Times, nor have I ever done work for the governments of Ukraine or Russia. But we already know you worked for Yanukovych. You've got your offices in Kiev. What were you doing in Kiev? Just playing patty cakes? So now you say, oh, I'm doing business. Okay, well, now wait a minute. Your businesses are connected to Yanukovych, and it's right here. Nope. You don't have video of me taking that cash and actually putting it into my pocket. Nope. The media is lying about everything because if I'm got my followers to believe that there is no objective truth, they'll believe me even when they see me pocketing all this money from the Russians. Yeah, I never did it. It's the media bias. Yeah, that's the ticket. Now, imagine what he does if he actually gets into office. If Trump wins the presidency and puts Manafort in charge of our government, some important branch of the government, believe me, his campaign manager is going to be in charge of a very important branch of our government. Now, which branch do you think he's going to want to get involved in? Probably something to do with foreign policy. And God knows what he gives away of our property. Look at what he did to the Ukrainians. Imagine what he could do on an American scale, what he could do with your taxpayer money.